The first chapter, 2 years ago, life was a dream sequence I never wanted to wake up from. I was Caroline, a young woman madly in love with the man of her dreams, Mark. He was everything I'd ever wished for, charming, intelligent, and attentive. We met at a friend's wedding, an event that now seems almost prophetic given the path we'd take together. "May I have this dance?" Mark asked, extending his hand to me at that fateful wedding. Of course, I smiled, taken by his chivalry and the twinkling in his eyes. As we swayed to the music, it felt like time stood still. Soon after that dance, we went on our first date, and then another, and another, until the lines between days blurred into a beautiful picture of love and companionship. Fast forward a few whirlwind months, and Mark was down on one knee in the moonlit garden of our favorite restaurant, an engagement ring sparkling in his hand. "Caroline, will you marry me?" His voice trembled with emotion. "Yes," was all I could muster, my voice choked with tears of joy. The wedding preparations kicked off immediately. Each day, a flurry of tastings, fittings, and meetings with vendors. Our families got involved, their excitement palpable and infectious. Everyone seemed to think we were a match made in heaven, and I agreed. As I walked down the aisle on our wedding day, my father's arm looped around mine. I looked up and caught Mark's gaze. His eyes were full of love and anticipation, as if he too couldn't wait for the first day of the rest of our lives to begin. "We are gathered here today to celebrate the union of two hearts," the minister began, his words a soft melody accompanying the magic of the moment. "Do you, Mark, take Caroline to be your lawfully wedded wife, to have and to hold from this day forward, for better or for worse, for richer or for worse, for richer or for poorer, in sickness and in health, to love and to cherish, until death do you part?" The minister looked at Mark as he voiced the sacred vows. "I do," Mark said, his voice unwavering, full of promise. "And do you, Caroline, take Mark to be your lawfully wedded husband, to have and to hold, from this day forward, for better or for worse, for richer or for worse, for richer or for poorer, in sickness and in health, to love and to cherish, until death do you part?" "I do," I responded, my eyes locked onto Mark's, believing every word I spoke. Our lips met for the first kiss as a married couple, and the room erupted in cheers and applause. At that moment, standing at the altar with our friends and family showering us with love and well wishes, I felt invincible. It was as if the universe had aligned perfectly to gift us this everlasting happiness. The reception was a blur of joyous moments. Our first dance, the clinking of glasses, the laughter and stories shared, but most of all, I remember feeling grateful, thinking that I was the luckiest woman in the world to be Mark's wife. "I love you, Caroline," Mark whispered into my ear during our dance, as if it were a secret too precious for the world to know. "I love you too, forever and always," I replied, holding him closer, tighter. As we drove off to our honeymoon, our car adorned with just married signs and colorful streamers, I felt like we were embarking on an endless adventure together. We had the world at our feet, and a lifetime of happiness seemed not just possible, but inevitable. Oh, how naive I was! There you go, the first chapter in the tale of my marriage to Mark. It was a time so perfect, so imbued with love, that even now it's hard to believe how quickly things can change. But as they say, when it rains, it pours. The first year of our marriage flew by in what seemed like a blink, filled with weekend getaways, dinner parties, and cozy nights in. We celebrated our first anniversary at the same restaurant where Mark had proposed. Champagne glasses clinked, and we looked into each other's eyes, still enamored, but also slightly complacent, as if the hard part was behind us. Little did we know that the universe had other plans. "We made it through year one," Mark said, his smile broad but his eyes somehow distant as he raised his glass for a toast. "To many more," I replied, clinking my glass against his. The words felt automatic, almost rehearsed, but I brushed off the tiny pang of doubt that flashed in my mind. We were happy, but something began to shift during our second year. Maybe it was the mounting stress of our finances or the pressure of our jobs, but our laughter became more infrequent, our conversations more strained. We bought a house on credit, convincing ourselves it was a wise investment for our future. I could feel the walls of that home closing in on us as bills piled up on the kitchen table, a constant reminder of our precarious situation. Our shared dreams of starting a family soon turned into tense discussions about whether we could afford it. But when I found out I was pregnant, it felt like a miracle amid the chaos. I thought it could be the catalyst for us to rekindle the love and unity that seemed to be slipping away. "Mark, we're going to have a baby," I announced one evening, holding up the positive pregnancy test as if it were a winning lottery ticket. "That's great," he responded, his eyes reflecting a mix of emotions, surprise, joy, but also a tinge of worry. "You don't seem excited," I said, my heart sinking at his lackluster reaction. I am, Caroline. It's just, we'll manage like we always do, I replied, trying to muster enthusiasm to mask my own doubts. As my belly grew, so did our debts and tensions. Mark became more distant, buried in his work and consumed with financial worries. I had to go on maternity leave, and the reduction in our income was palpable. In whispers and stolen glances, the strain showed itself, but we were both too afraid to confront it directly. This is the third late notice, Mark, I said one day, my voice shaky as I held up the mortgage bill. What are we going to do? I don't know, Caroline, he snapped, his face flushed with frustration and something else, perhaps shame. The fault lines in our marriage were becoming too evident to ignore. Each bill, each argument about money, felt like a small tremor leading up to something catastrophic. Even when we weren't talking about our problems, they hovered in the air around us, a dark cloud casting a shadow over our lives. Despite all this, I was hopeful. I had to be. I was carrying our child, a life we had created together, and I clung to the naive hope that maybe, just maybe, this baby could mend what was broken between us. But the coming months would shatter those illusions, ripping the ground from beneath my feet and forcing me into a reality I never thought possible. As my pregnancy advanced, I felt a growing disconnect with Mark. He worked long hours, and when he was home, he was mentally distant, lost in a world of worries I couldn't penetrate. I tried to focus on preparing for the baby, immersing myself in decorating the nursery and researching parenting tips, but the weight of our situation was ever present. Then came that fateful evening, the night that changed everything. Mark walked through the door, and I knew immediately that something was different. There was a darkness in his eyes that I'd never seen before, a kind of malevolence that made my stomach churn. Hey, you're home early, I said, trying to keep my voice steady. Yeah, he replied curtly, making a beeline for the liquor cabinet and pouring himself a glass of whiskey. What's going on, Mark? You're scaring me. Scaring you? That's rich, coming from the woman who's about to ruin us financially, he spat out. His words slurred, his eyes narrowed. Are you drunk? I asked, disbelief clouding my voice. It's about this house we can't afford, this baby we're not ready for. We're sinking, Caroline, and it's all your fault. My fault. We made these decisions together, Mark. Did we? Or did you manipulate me into a life I never wanted? He sneered, downing another glass of whiskey. I can't believe you're saying this. I thought we were in this together, I replied, tears streaming down my face. That was before, he said, a chilling calm settling over his features. I want you out, and I want you to get rid of the baby. I was stunned, speechless. All the love and respect I had for this man vanished in that moment. I couldn't comprehend what he was saying. Was this really Mark, the same man who had vowed to love and cherish me? I will not get an abortion, Mark. I can't believe you'd even ask that of me, I managed to say, trembling from head to toe. Then you're on your own, Caroline. I can't be tied down to a life I didn't choose, he retorted, leaving the room with an air of finality. I walked to our bedroom, my mind racing. Every step felt like wading through a swamp, heavy and suffocating. I locked the door behind me and let the tears flow freely. The dream was over, the illusion shattered. Our marriage had reached its breaking point, and I knew there was no going back. After that night, living in the same house felt like cohabitating with a ghost, a haunting presence that reminded me of everything we used to be and would never be again. A few days later, with my mother's help, I packed my bags and left the home that had once symbolized our love but now felt like a prison. It was a decision fraught with difficulty, especially being pregnant. Yet, I knew it was the right thing to do. Mark had shown his true colors, and I couldn't bring a child into a world with a father capable of such callousness. As I drove away, I glanced at the rearview mirror, half expecting Mark to come running out, begging for forgiveness. But all I saw was the shrinking image of a house, a broken home that had once held so much promise. And though my heart was heavy with loss and betrayal, I also felt a newfound sense of determination. Mark had made his choice, and now it was time for me to make mine. I was about to become a mother, and while the future was uncertain, one thing was clear. I would do whatever it took to protect my child, even if it meant standing alone. And so, as I drove down that long, winding road, I felt both the closing of one chapter and the beginning of another. What lay ahead was unknown, but I was ready to face it, with or without Mark. After settling into my mother's house, my immediate focus shifted to the impending arrival of my child. The woman who had raised me was now going to help me raise my own. There was a certain poetic symmetry in that, a bright spot in an otherwise murky chapter of my life. The baby was due in a couple of months, and the preparations kept us busy. My mom and I converted a small guest room into a nursery, and although we had to do it on a budget, it was filled with love and anticipation. With each stroke of paint and each screw tightened, I felt the reality of motherhood seeping in. I was excited, yes, but also terrified, especially because Mark was entirely out of the picture. That was until I received the legal papers. One afternoon, a thick envelope with Mark's handwriting on it landed on my doorstep. My heart raced as I tore it open. It was a divorce petition, laced with demands that were unimaginable just months ago. He was asking for full ownership of our house, claiming it was his prior to our marriage. Even more shockingly, he was demanding a paternity test to verify if the child was his. "Can he actually do this, Mom?" I asked, my hands trembling as I held the legal documents. "He's desperate, Caroline. But we'll fight this. We must," Mom replied, her voice tinged with anger and disbelief. The next few weeks were a blur of legal consultations and sleepless nights. My lawyer advised me to gather all the evidence I could find, financial records, property deeds, even text messages and emails that could prove Mark's ill intentions. "I can't believe it has come to this," I said one day, as my lawyer sifted through the piles of paperwork. "I used to love that man. How did we end up here?" "Life is unpredictable, Caroline. But right now, we have to focus on securing your future and that of your child," she said, her face stern but her eyes filled with compassion. In a surreal twist, Mark agreed to a meeting to discuss the divorce proceedings. I was hesitant but decided to go, hoping to find some closure, if not for me, then for my unborn child. When I walked into the cafe where we'd agreed to meet, I felt a pang of sadness seeing him there. His eyes met mine, but they were devoid of the love and warmth I once knew. "Let's get this over with," Mark said, not even bothering with pleasantries. "Why are you doing this, Mark? Is it really all about the money?" "You made your choice, Caroline. Now I'm making mine." But demanding a paternity test, questioning whether this baby is yours. I couldn't contain the disbelief and hurt in my voice. "Can you blame me? How do I know what you've been up to since you left?" His words were a slap in the face, each syllable cutting deeper than the last. "You've really become a monster," I said, my eyes welling up with tears. "I can't believe I ever loved you." With that, I stood up, grabbed my purse, and walked out, leaving Mark and the wreckage of our failed marriage behind me. The unthinkable had happened. The man I once vowed to spend my life with was now a stranger, willing to tear apart my world for his own gain. But as I walked out of that cafe, something inside me clicked. I was done being the victim of Mark's malice. If he wanted a fight, then a fight he would get. I was ready to take back control of my life, for my sake and for the sake of my unborn child. And so, with steely resolve, I braced myself for the battle that lay ahead. Months had passed, and the baby was due any day. The divorce proceedings were messy, stretching on for what felt like an eternity, but finally, a hearing was scheduled to resolve the financial and custody issues. I had retained a strong legal team, all while keeping my focus on the health and well-being of my unborn child. No matter how stressful the situation got, I had to remember that I was fighting for two lives now. My mom accompanied me to court, her presence a comforting pillar of strength. As we walked into the courtroom, Mark sat there, his eyes hollow, yet filled with a stubborn determination that made my skin crawl. "Please be seated," the judge said as the hearing commenced. After a painstaking review of the evidence, financial records, and testimonies from both sides, the moment of reckoning arrived. "Considering the evidence presented, the property acquired during the marriage will be divided fairly," the judge began. "Moreover, due to Mr. Mark's lack of stable income and the considerable financial risk he presents, the house will be awarded to Mrs. Caroline, who has demonstrated a more consistent income and career path." A wave of relief washed over me, but what came next was the sweetest victory of all. As for the paternity test requested, the court finds this completely unnecessary and dismissive of the emotional strain it places on Mrs. Caroline, who is near her term. The court thus dismisses this request. Mark looked stunned. His face flushed a shade of red I had never seen before. His ill-conceived plan to bully me out of what was rightfully mine had crumbled before his eyes. For the first time since this nightmare began, I felt like I could breathe. The judge then announced that, based on the impending birth and my financial situation, alimony would be applied and calculated once the child was born. Mark's face twisted into a grimace, clearly seeing this as the ultimate defeat. Outside the courtroom, my mother hugged me tightly, her eyes filled with tears of relief and pride. "You did it, Caroline. You stood your ground." And I had, not just for me, but for my child, who deserved a better future than the one Mark was willing to provide. Shortly after the trial, my beautiful daughter was born. Holding her in my arms, I realized that she was my new beginning. Mark had destroyed our marriage and tried to wreck my life, but he couldn't touch the love I felt for this tiny being. Unexpectedly, a few weeks later, I received a visit from Mark. He looked haggard, defeated, standing at my door as if the weight of his decisions had finally caught up with him. "Caroline, can we talk?" His voice was low, almost desperate. "What's left to talk about, Mark? I was wrong. I see that now. I love you. I love our daughter. Can't we try again?" For a moment, I looked into his eyes, searching for the man I had once loved. But he was gone, replaced by a stranger I barely recognized. "Mark, you wanted me to abort our child, to give up the most beautiful thing that ever happened to me. You don't deserve us." "But, Caroline, No, Mark, you made your choices, and now you have to live with them. We're better off without you." I closed the door, cutting off whatever excuses he had left to offer. It was the end for us, but the beginning for me and my daughter. Mark had gambled with our lives and lost. I was free, my child was safe, and the property that he had been so eager to snatch away was now ours. As I sat down to feed my daughter, I felt the lightness of sweet revenge wash over me. I had not just survived, I had triumphed. The scars would remain, but so would the lessons. And as I looked into my daughter's innocent eyes, I knew that we were going to be just fine. Life after the trial and the birth of my daughter felt like emerging from a long, dark tunnel into the light. I returned to work, balancing my career with motherhood, something Mark said I wouldn't be able to do. My mother was my rock, helping with childcare and offering emotional support that I couldn't have done without. It had been 6 months since my daughter's birth when the notice came. Mark had found gainful employment and was appealing the court's alimony decision. I couldn't help but feel this was yet another tactic, another way to assert control. However, my legal team was confident that given his previous behavior and the judge's findings, the chances of an appeal succeeding were minimal. "So he's trying to fight the alimony now?" my best friend Sarah asked incredulously as we had coffee one afternoon. "Yes, can you believe it? Just when I thought I was free, I sighed." "Well, he's in for a surprise. You've got everything, well, documented, and you've got a great legal team," she assured me. Days later, the appeal hearing took place. Mark walked into the courtroom, this time looking a bit more put together, but still carrying the air of desperation. I couldn't help but wonder how his life would have turned out if he had made different choices. The judge reviewed the documents and heard the attorneys make their respective cases. Finally, she spoke. After reviewing the updated circumstances and evidence, the court finds no reason to amend the original alimony ruling. The decision stands as it is. Mark's face contorted in disbelief, a mixture of surprise and anger. This was his final chance to pivot the narrative, and he had lost. Outside the courtroom, he approached me. "Caroline, this isn't fair, and you know it." "Fair? Was it fair to kick your pregnant wife out? Was it fair to force her to make choices no one should have to make?" I responded, holding back tears. "I've changed, Caroline. I'm working now. I can provide," he pleaded. Change isn't just about finding a job, Mark. It's about realizing the gravity of your actions and making amends. You had your chance and you chose poorly. "Live with it," I said, turning my back to him. Weeks turned into months, and life moved on. Mark did make an attempt to see his daughter, but given the legal restrictions in his past, the visits were supervised and few. Every time he left, I felt like I dodged yet another bullet. I continued to grow stronger each day, both as a person and as a mother. The job that Mark said would be impossible to handle alongside motherhood was going well. I even received a promotion, a testament to my capabilities that Mark had so often undermined. In time, the wounds began to heal. My daughter's first steps, her first words, her instant laughter, each of these milestones washed away a bit more of the bitterness that had tainted my life. Yet, the lessons stayed with me. They became my armor, my warning signs, my wisdom. "Mommy, who's that man in the photo?" my daughter would eventually ask, pointing to an old wedding picture I had yet to put away.